tell us who you are and how you're associated with the B-58.
My name is Charlie Hooker, and I was a B-58 pilot from 1963 through most of 1969.
What's the importance of the B-58?
Well, the importance of the 58 when it became operational was to defeat defenses on the Russian front. It was multi-capable in the sense that it could deliver weapons at speeds at Mach 2 or better, or at low level. And it compounded the problems that the Russians had defending. Of course, this was during the Cold War when this was very important.
Where were you based?
I was based at Carswell in Fort Worth, and then moved to Little Rock with the unit in 1964.
What would it mean to Fort Worth to have this airplane here?
For me, Fort Worth has always been the home of the B-58, and I think there's a lot more to it than that. I think that the city of Fort Worth welcomed us all, and since we were a little bit unique, there was a lot of interest, a lot of visibility for the B-58 program, and I don't know anybody that lived in Fort Worth that didn't absolutely love it, and I'm sincere about that. The schools were wonderful for our children. We were welcomed everywhere we went, even though we made a lot of noise in the middle of the night and early in the morning with our takeoffs and landings. It was a place that we were comfortable in, a place that we felt welcome in.
The airplane, or the construction of the airplane at the bomber plant, employed lots and lots of folks. And did you ever get to meet any of those people?
I did, especially in the flight test area. I met a number of people there, but it was very handy right across the runway, and we maintained a connection, a presence with the factory due to the fact that many components of the airplane were not available other than the factory in Fort Worth. So it was very difficult to cut that umbilical, and the B-58 really stayed relied on the plant in Fort Worth throughout its life.
So you kept connections with the plant. Did you fly back here much after you? Did you come here for training as well? Or were you?
I did come here for training in 1963 through ground school and, of course, the flight training. But as far as the factory Air Force connections, we flew in. I went to many tech data conferences. We helped write the tech manuals, the pilot operating manuals with the technical people at the plant, and then they supported us in all the systems. When we had an in-flight emergency, invariably the command post, if it was a difficult one, would get the factory guys on the line, and you could talk to the guy that built the system, and that was very helpful.
I can imagine. What was unique about this airplane? We talked a little bit about how it seemed to be far ahead of its time. What was your impression of its technology that it brought?
Well, the technology as far as speed and ability to carry payloads jumped an order of magnitude over what we'd seen before. All the bombers were subsonic. This is the world's first supersonic bomber. And it was unique in that it had one pilot, one radar navigator, one defensive systems operator. We flew long flights, and which was unique for a one-pilot airplane. You couldn't move around. You were in the seat for the entire time, and we had to communicate back and forth. That was kind of unique. You couldn't see the other guys in the airplane, and of course the speed in which we flew. You had to think way out in front of the airplane, and certainly in critical phases of flight, bombing and air refueling, and supersonic flight and landing. Nothing ever landed faster than a B-58 did. For that reason, we had a big brake shoot on it, but our approach speeds were in the 190 to 200 knot area, which is well above 200 miles an hour, and the airplane touched down in 170, 180 knot regime. And so you had to be on your P's and Q's, and you had to stay ahead of the airplane. It was a great airplane to fly. It was not difficult to fly. In fact, the flight characteristics were wonderful. It was a solid airplane. We could fly in bumpy weather when other airplanes couldn't fly, particularly at low level. The 58 was a smooth ride because the delta wing smoothed out the bumps and the jolts. But there were a lot of things about the airplane because of its technology jumps and so forth.
Did you ever have any concerns about flying in weather in this airplane?
No, nothing. We typically didn't like to fly in thunderstorms anyhow, but the landing speed of the airplane was critical in terms of trying to land on ice or wet runways and things of that nature, and you had to stay ahead of it in that regard. But it was a wonderful weather airplane. It flew very well in weather.
When you first started flying, what would you have thought if somebody told you you'd be flying a Mach 2 airplane?
See, I don't know. I'm a Mississippi kid, and I was used to driving tractors before I flew airplanes. So, but I would not have believed that. But when I saw this airplane, when I saw what it could do, I was in SAC flying B-47s, and I couldn't wait to give it a shot. And I felt very fortunate to be able to get into the program because it was very restrictive in terms of the qualifications for the airplane.
What was a normal mission like for you?
A normal mission that was totally subsonic was typically 8 hours. You take off and refuel from an airborne tanker, and typically would fill the airplane up to pretty much max gross weight. And then after that, fly a low-level mission, which would be an hour and a half or so at treetop level with a bomb run, a simulated bomb run. And we could also do bomb runs from altitude, from 30,000 plus. One of the alternatives that we had to do periodically was a supersonic mission. Those typically were offshore because of the noise. I might add that I participated in early 1964 in a sonic boom program. Every Air Force airplane that was supersonic was flying over Oklahoma City, and they had an instrumented test bed down there, and they recorded overpressures and from every airplane that was in the Air Force inventory. And we went across one day and exceeded all of their noise limitations. We gave them the biggest bomb, the biggest noise that they'd had, and had to have a meeting with them because of that to see what we'd done. But this was in preparation for the country, the FAA, looking at flying a supersonic airliner. But those tests apparently led to the decision not to fly the supersonic airplanes, commercial airplanes over land.
Do you have any emergencies in a B-58?
I had a couple that, nothing to speak of. As far as I was concerned, it was a very safe airplane. The things that I had were typically run-of-the-mill oil pressure problems and things of that nature. But I got a good safe ride in the airplane.
Very good. Anything else you'd like to tell us about the airplane?
Just that I think that the airplane was deployed, was put on alert for the first time, I believe, in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and taken off of alert at the end of 1969. And there were so many things that I was also involved in the B-1 test program. And I know a lot about what future airplanes look like, and I can tell you that this airplane here, had it been the life of the airplane been extended, had we gone to fan engines for fuel efficiency, things of that nature, that this airplane would do what many, many airplanes that have been built since then would not do. It was by far a superior penetrator, and it was built to penetrate hostile defenses at both low and high level, and as far as I'm concerned, it was still the best at that job.
I think did you mention that you were involved in the F-111 program?
I was, yes.
What do you think did the F-111 help the demise of the B-58?
Possibly. My understanding was it was more than probably the cruise missile and things of that nature, but the new technology came along. But the F-111 was the fastest airplane at sea level ever built. And it had a penetration capability, and it had an outstanding radar, an outstanding navigation system, a bombing system you could drive nails with. It was that accurate. It was just a superlative airplane for the mission that it put. My understanding was that for SAC it was, not retrofittable. You couldn't hang as many things on. You couldn't change the systems out. It was a tightly packed, well-built fighter-type airplane. So a little bit different in terms of the role that it assumed, but it turned out that it was a very good medium nuclear bomber as well as a conventional bomber airplane.
Some of the more senior members here who were on alert during the Cuban Missile Crisis talked about what life was like when they were sitting on alert at that time. I don't think you were quite... Were you in B-47s at that time?
Yes, I was.
Okay. So you didn't get to... Well, I guess you did get to sit on alert during those times. What were those times like when you were probably watching the news and hearing a lot more than what most people were hearing? What was it like for the flight crews?
On a personal basis, my family my wife and my children were huddled up with another pilot's wife and children in Lincoln, Nebraska, and they were putting water in bathtubs. And I think that as a crew member, we were notified at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to report for duty. And it was a very real possibility that there was going to be a nuclear exchange. And certainly that was our business. So in terms of just being ready, we were ready anyhow, but all the airplanes went on alert. Some of the airplanes flushed out to satellite cities, Duluth, places like that, in civilian airports, in terms of B-47. But we were concerned about our families. I was put on a KC-135, and I spent the duration at Greenham Common in England on alert. But I think that the flight crews were, concerned about their own families, and they're very much concerned that there could be a nuclear exchange.
Is that hard for people to fathom that today?
Absolutely. As an aside, we've got wars going on right now, and it's business as usual in this country, and I don't think that's right. I don't think that we're tuned in to what our people are going through in the East, and we've become used to it, and we've become hardened to it, and it's not easy for those guys. Those guys are sleeping in the dirt, and they're getting shot at, and I don't think they get the attention that are deserved from our government, our people, or anybody else.
All right. Well, thank you. Did you get any more questions?
Could you talk about the defensive systems at all, other than the tail gun, actually including the tail gun? What was it?
With the B-58?
Yeah.
Sure. There was a 30-millimeter Gatling gun built by General Electric. It fired, I'd have to check with somebody, I think 4,000 to 6,000 rounds a minute of, I believe that's correct, of 30-millimeter.
Who operated?
The defensive systems operator who sat in the third station there. He had a scope, that he could actually track those targets. We test fired that over the Gulf frequently, and if he held the button down and say for 3 seconds or 5 seconds, you could pick up 5 knots of airspeed in the airplane. That's a true story. I watched that. Not only that, but he had a whole raft of listening devices back there that he could pick up radar signals and tell when they were in search, where they were in track, where we were going to be shot at. It was, and we had chaff also.
But you couldn't cloak it.
I'm sorry?
You couldn't cloak it.
No. Now, one of the things that we did in the B-1 when you manufacture that is we put nuclear hardness into the airplane, and there was some design factors in the B-1 that deterred some radar tracking too. It wasn't like the B-2 or the F-117, you know, where they were really radar, but the B-1 had a lot of radar absorptive material in it and some design to help with the stealthiness. But the B-1 did at low level essentially what we did in this airplane with some better systems. The B-1 had longer legs. It could fly further, but it couldn't go faster, and it couldn't outturn it. So.
How much aiming could that Gatling gun do?
Oh, they're quite accurate. It was a tracking gun. Of course, you'd be defending the rear of the aircraft. And when the defensive systems operator obtained a signal, he could lock onto it and it would automatically track it. And then when it got within range, he fired. And firing 30 millimeter high incendiary rounds, if you hit a wing or tail, it's gone. It's highly destructive. It doesn't take but one of those shells to hit that thing. The other side of it was that they really had to attack us from the front because nobody could catch us in those days.
Well, that was something we talked about earlier. Is who's going to be catching this airplane?
Well, you know, from a tail chase standpoint, not many people. They'd have to intercept you and shoot you with a missile in this airplane. In other words, they'd have to do a lead intercept. But we also, in the lead end of this thing, flew the F-102. We ran a lot of intercepts. And the B-58 had to slow down so the 102s could stay up with it and run intercepts on it.
I think we're good.
Good.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Hope that was useful.
Oh, it was very useful. Very, very interesting.